Hi, this is going to be a demonstration of the new explosion generator version 3 from Deep Blue Ideas. So it's a tool that lets you generate explosions for your games or any other projects you may be working on. It runs on both Macintosh and Windows. I'll go through the versions and variants later, but it works on most systems. So let's just fire it up here. Okay, so the first thing you see is the main interface where you configure all the explosions. We'll go through all the settings in more detail in a moment, but I'll just create a quick explosion here for you. Put some rocks in, there we go. So very quickly create an explosion, and all I'm going to do, I'm going to grab these frames. So the system captures all the explosion frames, and here they all are. Okay, the system's actually captured 59 frames, but for our game we can see how many frames we want to use. We can say, well, actually I just want 26 frames. And what will actually happen is the explosion generator will pick out 26 key frames that make up this explosion. Likewise, if you actually said I only want 4 frames, you'll just get 4 frames from the base explosion you created. So for my example, I'm actually going to do, say, 36 frames. Okay, so you can see them all here. And on the preview here we can zoom in and we can change the background colour to see what it actually look like on different coloured backgrounds. So, okay, so this demo I'm just going to run straight through to show you what we can actually do with the tool. From here we can actually export the animation out. And I'll just go through this quickly. This is telling us the animation is actually 400 by 400 pixels with 36 frames. And we can scale down accordingly, so we can say actually we want to do it 50%. Okay, so now they become 200 by 200 each frame. And then we can pick the output format. A series of PNG files, a series of TIFFs, JPEGs, a PNG sprite sheet, or some actual project files pre-built for you with your animation already put in. So if I pick, for example, the Corona project file, it'll actually create a sprite sheet for me, and all the Lua files required to actually build the animation inside Corona. Here I can just adjust the size of the sprite sheet. So we get the best size here is 1024 2048. But again, if I actually made this smaller, you'll see the sprite sheet reduces as well. By doing this, you can actually make your sprites smaller. Then you can actually just set the scale up in the actual Lua code. So the sprites, once at 50%, will be played back 1.6 times greater in the Corona project. Okay, so just choose where you want to export the explosion project out to. Click export. All the code is generated for you on the fly. That's all done now. So if I go over to where the explosion was actually created inside my folder, okay, here I can actually see here's my explosion that was created. Here's all the Lua files that were created, and here's my explosion sprite sheet that was created for me on the fly. So if I actually open this up inside Corona, just so you can see what it actually does for you. So Corona, load it up. Okay, open the main file. And it creates a default iPhone project for you, just as an example. So there's your explosion, all put together for you very quickly, very nice, neat. And you can obviously reuse the code and repurpose the code for your games, etc. Okay, so that's a very quick example of what we can do with the project, with the tool. Create an explosion, export it straight out into our SDK or a PNG file for us to use. Okay, what I'll actually do, I'll create another explosion now and give a bit more detail. So I'll delete this one. Okay, if we go back and edit the explosion here. So what can we do with the tool? Well, we'll turn off the fragments for now, so we'll just see the raw animation for the explosion. What I'm actually going to do, just explain about the colours, how the colour actually works. If we select a base colour of say black, so it's all completely black, and say no merge on the colours, and pull all the colours down, and what you can see, if I push the red up, I get red explosion. I push the green up, I start getting some green in there. Okay, so a bit of red and green, and the blue, and obviously now I'm mixing all the RGB values up. So this is how the colours are actually working. So if I was actually to say specifically I want to start with orange, then you're actually going to get a red variance of the orange, green variance of the orange, and a blue variance of the orange. So, which obviously isn't always a desirable result. I'm just trying to explain what the colour does here. And also what we can actually do, we can actually move around the different colours, how they merge between themselves. So we can actually merge the green and the blue, So the green and the blue are going to merge now, the red and the blue, and the red and the green. So again, this is just about giving you more controls to create the explosion you want. So we'll create a nice pinky one like so. Okay, so here's a nice pinky explosion we've got going on. What I'm going to do is just quickly explain to you about the particle configurations down the bottom here and how this works. A lot of people have asked this in the past, but it is quite straightforward really. So first particle configuration, no frequency, and this is what it actually ends up looking like. If I put a frequency of 1 in, you actually see, well, there's no peaks to the explosion. So I'm just going to push up the amplitude just to show you. So here we go, we've got 1 peak going off to the right. If I put 2 in, I've got 2 peaks now. And this is how simple it really is. So 3 peaks, 3, 4, 4, and so on and so on and so on. Okay. The phase is, well, for what we're doing here, you can treat it as the rotation of this particular shape. So if I turn it around, you can see the star is now almost straight on. Phase is going around a slightly different angle, and so on and so on. Simply, the second particle configuration down here is just another layer of the explosion. So if I did another layer that was, say, 4, I've now got an explosion inside that's 4, on top of the 1 that's 5, and then the 2 actually interact with each other as well. So what you actually start getting is some random generation each time to make your explosions unique. Okay, so the best thing you can actually do is play around with them. Now what I'm actually going to do is go back and just very quickly explain the amplitude. The amplitude is the how high the peaks of the explosion are. So for example, I'm all the way up here at amplitude of 1. If I pull this down halfway, you'll see the peaks aren't so high now. So I'll put it down to 0, no peaks at all, they're all quite flat, uniform. So again, 0.7 for example, I get some high peaks. So I get some good random variations going on by adding the other particles to it, and I can start creating a more dynamic explosion. Okay, so that's roughly what these particles, the particle configuration is down here. So you just play with this until you find the configurations you're happy with for your explosion. Okay, what we're going to do now is just have a look at the life of the explosion, the step, the radius, etc, etc. Well, the radius, I think, as you can imagine, that's not actually necessarily the radius of the actual explosion. It's actually works in conjunction with the life of the explosion to work out how quickly the explosion ends, based on the radius, based on the life of the particles. So if I pull the particles life down as well, you can see very quickly it dies. If I push the radius up, the particles go out further. So I'll pull this right down again, and we'll push the life up a little bit. Okay. Steps is actually going to be how many of the ember particles are going to be created inside here. So you can see not so many and quickly fades out. So I'll push this all the way up, lots and lots and lots and lots of these embers being created. And again, for this example, we'll make it quite small. Now then, the sparks is these inner sparks that you may have noticed a moment ago. And that's, if I pull the steps down, you'll see that's these little fragments coming out now. So if I put lots of sparks in, you'll see lots more sparks coming out. Okay, so just push it all up. There you go, lots and lots of sparks. Push it down, not too many. Okay, so we'll just push this up, make our explosion last a bit longer while we're doing this demonstration. Okay, so here's our explosion. Next one down is the speed, and that's quite simply how quick actually the overall explosion takes place. Obviously I've slowed it all down now, and actually when we come to grab this explosion, we'll be able to grab a lot more frames as well, because this explosion, the life of the explosion is taking a lot longer to process. So that's a very quick overview of what the interface and what the controllers actually do to generate your explosion. Okay, so what we're going to do now, we're going to have a quick look at how the fragments work within our explosion. And we can choose different fragments from the frag effect here, which is like a shattered effect, and how many fragments appear on the screen. So we'll just pull this down a little bit to give us a less. We can have the coin effect. There you go, the coins are exploding now, and the actual fragments do follow the pattern of the actual particles as well. So if you put the peaks up a little bit, there we go. The actual coins do follow, in this example, the peaks. Likewise with the rocks, so you can have the rocks in your explosion, or the hearts. There's some hearts, or the stars and the sparkle or the glow. So we'll stick with the glow for now. So we can actually just apply the fragments to it. And over on the left here in the library, there's just some default explosions I did just to get people going, really, just some different colourways and different ideas. Another thing you can actually do is actually save your explosion now. So if you actually say save, you can actually say, well, I'm going to save this as my explosion 1. Okay, so, and a bit later on you may have changed your explosion, done other things, etc, etc, done some bits, and say, oh no, I want to go back to that one, or you want to share it with somebody, so you can actually load that one back in. So load your explosion, my explosion, and then here's your explosion that we created earlier. So you can now save and load your explosions, etc. Now I'm just going to quickly explain what frame culling here is. This is used when we actually grab the frames to put into our animations. This is available in the full version of Explosion Generator. At the moment, as you can see in this explosion here, we've got lots of white sparks and not much activity. Now the frame culling, when enabled like now, will actually not capture now these type of frames to try and save on space. So if I grab this animation now, what you'll see is it's going to grab, and you'll see it's actually stopped grabbing at around 36 frames. This particular animation. The tool's just trying to save memory, and it doesn't believe those actual frames are required. Obviously you can override that with the frame culling option switched off, which is what we're going to do next. So go back to this explosion, turn frame culling off, and say grab. What's going to happen now, we're going to actually start grabbing a lot more data, which gives us a much finer animation, as you can see, to go into our project. But it's also generated an awful lot more files, 86 files. Now again, I'm set to 36 frames here, but I could grab all 86 frames to use in my game. Now that would take up a lot of memory, but would give a very, very nice smooth explosion for sure. But again, I'm just going to grab, say, 40 frames, and it'll work out the best 40 frames to use, and there you go. So even though the tool actually grabbed 86 frames, you can actually say I just want 40 frames, and the tool will work out the best 40. Although because there's so much black space, not much data on it, you can have a lot of what I'd call or consider wasted space. So again, it's down to your preferences and what you require for your game, but frame culling is switched on by default just to try and help you save memory. Okay, so here's my animation now with frame culling on. What I'm going to do, I'm just going to change the colour to explosion a little bit. I want it to be a bit greener, just to help it stand out a little bit. Okay, so here's my green explosion. I'm going to grab this, and we're going to talk about exporting a little bit into different project formats. Again, I'm going to stick with 28 frames. It only captured 28 frames, for example. Some people have asked that they want a lot more frames for their animations. Now in version 3, even though this only captured 28, what you can actually do is go back to the explosion and slow the explosion down. So let's slow it down a little bit and grab now. It's now going to grab a lot more frames. Again, if you want even more frames, slow it down more, it'll grab more frames. Obviously in your game you can play it back quicker, and that's not a problem at all. So it's up to yourselves how you actually want to, how many frames you want to grab, and the tool will work with you grabbing them. So okay, we're going to work with these 27 frames now. Let's export this out. Okay, we talked a little bit about the size and scales that you can actually do to help maintain memory, but I'm actually going to go through the different export options. What we have here, the first one is the PNG files. Now this is separate PNG files for each one, and you can actually ask the tool to generate the file masked, a separate mask, and the image without any mask. So for my example, I'm going to do all three, and I'm going to export it out into our folder. So pick our folder and let's export it out. Okay, so it's each of the frames masked with transparency and one without transparency. If I have a look inside my folder, I now have the combined PNGs, the masks, and the one with no mask. So here's the ones with no mask, so it's just black background. This is just the mask, so it's just going to be black and white, and the combined PNG files all put together for us. Okay, so you can open these up and view them in preview. And obviously you can place them in separately now into your project files. What we're going to do now, we're going to have a look at TIFF. Is very similar, so you can export out the different formats, different options, but in the TIFF format. And the JPEG, you can actually export out as JPEG files, but obviously JPEG doesn't support transparency, so you can pick a black or white background and the quality. So if I said a black background, bring the quality down, export this out. And let's go to the PNG sprite sheet. This is just going to be a generic sprite sheet based on this size and what background we want. So we could have a white background, black, or a custom colour if you have a particular tool that masks out a particular colour for sprite sheets. My example, I'm going to use transparent. You can actually change the order, the layout of the sprites. This tells us it's going to go 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 in this order here. But to find the best configuration and the best size, just have a quick play around with the X and Y parameters. So I'll export this out just to show you this as a PNG sprite sheet. Okay, so here's my sprite sheet all on its own, been created. Okay, so let's do another format. This time what we'll actually do, we'll export out to GameSalad, for example. Now in GameSalad, the project file we create, we've done some way you can actually create random sizes. I'll turn this off for this example. And also the explosion is quite large at 400 by 400, so I'm going to reduce this down to say 50, so it's 50%, so it becomes 200 by 200. And I want the frame to run, these 27 frames to run at around 40 frames a second in the GameSalad project. Okay, so let's export this out straight to GameSalad. So you're going to generate the GameSalad project file with all the animation in place on the desktop. Okay, and here's our GameSalad project file. So if we open this up in GameSalad, I'm just double click and open it. Here's the scene, it's been built for us, all ready to go. The images have been put in for us, and the behaviours and the animation behaviours has all been put in for us, as well as the timers, how many frames, etc. all come from the explosion generator tool. So if I play this project for you, so you can see, it's just an example, but you can just tap the screen and see your explosions play back. So I know it's very basic, but again, it's just to get people going, getting the explosions into their project files. So let's close this down. And then I know we showed it earlier, but what we can actually do, we can export straight into Corona. Same explosion. I'm going to change this sprite sheet because I know it could be better optimized to this point here. We're going to enlarge it a little bit, and it's going to play over half a second by the looks of it. So let's just export this one out. And again, this is going to create the PNG sprite sheet, all the files that are required to run the Lua files in Corona, and all the resource files that are required to actually run this, as well as the sprite sheet and the sprite sheet data files. So if we open this up now, we can have a look. Okay, so it's this one. And then there's our explosion. And again, it's a bit larger this time because we actually told it to make it a little bit larger, 1.6%. So again, you can have it to 100%, it doesn't really matter. Okay, so for this animation though, I think it's happening a little bit too quick and stopping a little bit too short. So for the Corona project, what I'm going to do, I'm going to close this one down. Let's go rid of these. I'm actually going to say for the Corona project, I want 40 frames. Okay, export the animation, still into Corona, it's all defaulted ready for that. I'm going to do it at 75%. I'm going to have the explosion run at 1.2%. Let's have a look at this one. So we've got more frames, larger, so a bigger sprite sheet, more information, more detail. Here's our file that's been created, straight into Corona. And run the file, and there you go. It's a lot smoother, this explosion is. So we can actually add more frames to create the animation, make it smoother, make the explosion more realistic if that's what we wanted to do. Okay, and then the last option there that I think we saw was, get rid of this one, is you can actually export the project out straight into an Xcode project using the CocoOS 2D SDK. So export this out, and this will create a complete project file ready for you in Xcode. So export it out, see what it's created. So we've got all the Xcode files, all the Objective-C files, etc., all been created for you, along with all the plist files that go to how the explosion is built, and obviously the sprite sheet that's going to be used. So if I open this up in Xcode now, let's open the file. I'll just make my window a little bit smaller. So all the actual code has been generated for you, put in. All you need to do is actually compile it to your simulator or your device if you've got a device connected. Just compile and run. So it's just compiling. Okay, so once it's compiled and built, you can actually open it up. Well, it'll also actually open up in the simulator where you can test it. Okay, so here's the CocoOS project file, and there's our explosion all put together for us. And again, you just pick apart the Objective-C files that are put in, or you just use the PNG resource sprite sheet files using your project files. Okay, so it's a very simple example of creating a CocoOS Xcode project there. Okay, close this project down. Okay, so what we're going to talk about next is some of the extra features you can actually do with capturing the animation. I'm just going to go back to a big red one. Okay, let's just grab this. Okay, the tool, let's put on transparent background. The tool actually separates out and works out all the masking for you. Before you had some controls where you controlled the masking, but now the tool actually handles the masking to give you very deep, opaque explosions where required, and transparent fading out, as you've seen, nice and clean, onto different coloured backgrounds. Now, one of the things the tool does, it creates quite a vivid edge around the explosion itself, where it's trying to detect where the explosion needs to start becoming transparent. So what you can actually do, if this edge is not required for your app, or it's in the way, or you've got a very light background, for example, light background here, and it's very noticeable, what you can actually do is turn off the colour boost and the masking. So if you turn this off and grab the new frames, like so, what you'll actually find is the tool actually softens the edge towards the edge of the masks, the mask towards the explosion. So you can see now it's not so harsh, the mask. So if you've got very light backgrounds, that's probably the option you'd need to choose to generate your explosions. And again, if you wanted it nice, bright, tight masks, leave it turned on. For most cases, most instances, that's okay, and typically the explosions happen very quickly in your game, so you wouldn't notice them, but some specifics you may need it switched off, like so. Okay, so again, we've got a lot more controls now over all these frames. I'm just going to quickly say, well, actually I just want 12 frames, rejig to my 12 frames. I'm going to export this out straight into GameSolid over 40 frames a second. I'll make it 30 frames a second. I'll do some random sizes this time. Export this out, instantly take my 12 frames into GameSolid and create my explosions. And this time you can see there's different sizes happening this time. Again, that's just in the project file. So that's a very quick overview. I say quick, it's probably a bit drawn out, but here's an overview of the explosion generator tool version 3 and what it can do. A lot more options from version 1 and 2. I probably will just point out also what versions OSs it runs out on. It runs on Mac OS 10.6 Snow Leopard, 10.7 Lion and 10.8 Mountain Lion. It also runs on Windows XP, Windows 7 and Windows 8. They've been tested on the 64-bit operating systems, but it does seem to run nice and smooth on across the range of PC and Macintoshes. What I'm just going to show you quickly here now is something else you can actually do with the tool. Rather than just creating explosions, you can actually do all the effects as well. So I'm just going to give myself, start off with a black base. Okay, black. I'm just going to go for a red. Okay, nice deep red. I might just soften it a little bit. Not too much though, we need deep red. Nice deep red. Increase some of these fragments. That's it. Brighter. Yep. If you can make the explosion a little bit bigger. Also. Yep, it's nice. I'm going to change the speed here a little bit. Ooh. Yep. Change the steps. Change the sparks. A bit more. There we go. Okay, I'm going to add a little bit of smoke. Turn the smoke right down. So it's hardly there. Okay. And what I'm actually going to grab now, what I could actually use in my game, is a blood splat. So, very simple to create a blood splat effect. Quite popular at the moment. I think you'll agree. I'm going to give myself a few more frames there, so I'm actually just going to slow this down. Grab this now. Okay, 29 frames. I'll use 28 frames of that, I think. So 28 frames. There it is. Like a little blood splat. I'm going to export this straight out into Corona, for example. At 50%, gives me 250 by 250. Slightly larger again, as we spoke earlier. Change the sprite sheet size, make it more optimized. In the future we will look to optimize the sprite sheet sizes automatically, but for now just go through them. Put it into my folder, explosion folder. Although this explosion is going to be blood, remember. Okay, open up Corona. So this time, okay, it's still an explosion, but it's more of a blood splat now. So it could be a zombie's head exploding. Or we could obviously tweak and tune this further. So it's not just explosions you can create, you can actually create other effects as well. One of the other effects you can actually create is, rather than just creating explosions, you can actually turn off all the particles and just have the fragment on, for example. So here's this star fragment. I'll make the explosion a bit smaller again now. Okay, and I'm going to turn everything else off. So now I've just got a nice sparkle explosion thing going on. Okay, so I'm going to turn frame culling off this time, because obviously we don't want the white, we do want the white, sorry, to be picked up in the animation. So let's just grab that as an animation now. Lots of frames there when you don't do any culling. Okay, and again this time I'm going to say I want 48 frames for this effect, straight out into Corona. No changes from what we did a moment ago. I'll make it a little bit bigger. Okay. So this time there's no direct explosion as such, it's more of a explosion of particles, in this case this little stars twinkling. So we're straight into Corona, open it up, see what we've got. There we go. So it's all been generated for us, and it doesn't always have to be an explosion. There are other things you can actually do with the tool to actually create different effects. So yeah, that was an example and demonstration of Explosion Generator V3. Hope you enjoyed it. I hope you enjoyed the tool. Thank you. Bye bye.